Around the World in 80 Days, by Jules Verne, Chapter 28, in which Passepartout does not succeed in making anybody listen to reason. The train, on leaving Great Salt Lake at Ogden, passed northward for an hour as far as the Weber River. Having completed nearly 900 miles from San Francisco, from this point it took an easterly direction towards the jagged Wasatch Mountains. It was in the section included between this range and the Rocky Mountains that the American engineers found the most formidable difficulties in laying the road, and that the government granted a subsidy of $48,000 per mile instead of $16,000 allowed for the work done on the plains. But the engineers, instead of violating nature, avoided its difficulties by winding around instead of penetrating the rocks. One tunnel only, 14,000 feet in length, was pierced in order to arrive at the Great Basin. The track up to this time had reached its highest elevation at the Great Salt Lake. From this point it described a long curve, descending towards Bitter Creek Valley to rise again at the dividing ridge of the waters between the Atlantic and Pacific. There were many creeks in this mountainous region, and it was necessary to cross Muddy Creek, Green Creek, and others upon culverts. Passepartout grew more and more impatient as they went on, while Fix longed to get out of this difficult region, and was more anxious than Phileas Fogg himself to be beyond the danger of delays and accidents, and set foot on English soil. At 10 o'clock at night the train stopped at Fort Bridger Station, and 20 minutes later entered the Wyoming Territory. Followed by the valley of Bitter Creek throughout, the next day, 7th December, they stopped for a quarter of an hour at Green River Station. Snow had fallen abundantly during the night, but being mixed with rain it half melted. It did not interrupt the progress. The bad weather, however, annoyed Passepartout, for the accumulation of snow, by blocking the wheels of cars, would have certainly been fatal to Mr. Fogg's tour. "What an idea," he said to himself. "Why did my master make this journey in winter? Couldn't he have waited for a good season to increase his chances?" While the worthy Frenchman was absorbed in a state of sky and depression of the temperature, Aouda was experiencing fears from a totally different cause. Several passengers had got off at Green River and were walking up and down the platforms. Among these Aouda recognized Colonel Stamp Proctor, the same who had grossly insulted Phileas Fogg at the San Francisco meeting. Not wishing to be recognized, the young woman drew back from the window, feeling much alarm at her discovery. She was attached to the man who, however coldly, gave her daily evidences of the most absolute devotion. She did not comprehend, perhaps, the depth of the sentiment with which her protector inspired her, which she called gratitude, but which, though she was unconscious of it, was really more than that. Her heart sank within her when she recognized the man whom Mr. Fogg desired, sooner or later, to call into account for his conduct. Chance alone, it was clear, had brought Colonel Proctor on this train. But there he was, and it was necessary, at all hazards, that Phileas Fogg should not perceive his adversary. Aouda seized a moment when Mr. Fogg was asleep to tell Fix and Passepartout whom she had seen. "That Proctor is on this train," cried Fix. "Well, reassure yourself, madam. Before he settles with Mr. Fogg, he has got to deal with me. It seems that I was the more insulted of the two. And besides," added Passepartout, "I'll take charge of him, colonel as he is. Mr. Fix," resumed Aouda, "Mr. Fogg would allow no one to avenge him. He said he would come back to America to find this man. Should he receive Colonel Proctor, we would not prevent a collision which might have terrible results. He must not see him." "You are right, madam," replied Fix. "A meeting between them might ruin all. Whether he were victorious or beaten, Mr. Fogg would be delayed, and, added Passepartout, that would play the game of the gentlemen of the Reform Club. In 4 days we shall be in New York. Well, if my master does not leave his car during these 4 days, we may hope that chance will not bring him face to face with this confounded American. We must, if possible, prevent the stirring out of it." The conversation dropped. Mr. Fogg had just woke up, and was looking out of the window. Soon after, Passepartout, without being heard by his master Aouda, whispered to the detective, "Would you really fight for him?" "I would do anything," replied Fix, in a tone which betrayed determined will, "to get him living back to Europe." Passepartout felt something like a shudder shoot through his frame, but his confidence in his master remained unbroken. Was there any means of detaining Mr. Fogg in this car, to avoid a meeting between him and the colonel? It ought not to be a difficult task, since that gentleman was naturally sedentary and a little curious. The detective, at least, seemed to have found a way, for after a few moments he said to Mr. Fogg, "These are long and slow hours, sir, that we are passing on the railway." "Yes," replied Mr. Fogg, "but they pass." "You are in the habit of playing whist," resumed Fix, "on the steamers." "Yes, but it would be difficult to do so here. I have neither cards nor partners." "Oh, but we can easily buy some cards, for they are sold on all the American trains. As for partners, if madam plays—" "Certainly, sir," Aouda quickly replied. "I understand whist. It's a part of an English education. I myself having some pretensions to play a good game. Well, here are 3 of us and a dummy." "As you please, sir," replied Phileas Fogg, heartily glad to resume his favourite pastime, even on the railway. Passepartout was dispatched in search of the steward, and soon returned with 2 packs of cards, some pins, counters, and a shelf covered with cloth. The game commenced. Aouda understood whist sufficiently well, and even received some compliments on her playing for Mr. Fogg. As for the detective, he was simply an adept, and worthy of being matched against his present opponent. Now, thought Passepartout, we've got him, he won't budge. At 11 in the morning the train had reached the dividing ridge of the waters of the Bridger Pass, 7,524 feet above the level of the sea, one of the highest points attained by the track in crossing the Rocky Mountains. After going about 200 miles, the travellers at last found themselves on one of those vast plains which extend to the Atlantic, and which nature has made so propitious for laying in the iron road. On the declivity of the Atlantic basin, the first streams, branches of the North Platte River, already appeared. The whole northern and eastern horizon was bounded by the immense semicircular curtain which is formed by the southern portion of the Rocky Mountains, the highest being Laramie Peak. Between these the railway extended vast plains, plentifully irrigated,